The small cafe on Greenwich Avenue buzzed with its usual morning crowd. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the warm scent of baked pastries, creating a comforting escape from the cold winter morning outside. Regulars occupied their usual tables, sipping lattes while scrolling through their phones or tapping away on laptops. The hum of conversation, clinking cups, and soft jazz in the background made the cafe a cozy haven. But not for everyone. At the corner table near the window, an elderly woman sat quietly, stirring her tea. Her silver hair was neatly tied into a bun, and her long beige coat hung loosely around her shoulders. She wore simple yet elegant pearl earrings and had a kind face, though her eyes carried the weight of years. She looked peaceful, content, as if she were enjoying a rare moment of stillness. Across the room, a trio of young professionals in designer suits laughed over their cappuccinos. They weren't regulars, at least, not here. Their loud voices cut through the cafe's calm atmosphere, making heads turn. One of them, a man in his early 30s with slicked-back hair and a smug smile, leaned over and whispered something to his friends, pointing toward the elderly woman. "Look at her," he said, just loud enough for her to hear. "Sitting there like she owns the place. Probably spent her last few dollars on that tea." His friends chuckled, and one of the women in the group added, "Maybe she's waiting for someone to buy her breakfast. Should we offer her a croissant out of pity?" The elderly woman kept her gaze down, pretending not to hear, but her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the cup. She wasn't a stranger to judgment. It wasn't the first time people had made assumptions about her based on her appearance. But today, the words cut deeper than usual. As the trio continued their mocking remarks, a barista behind the counter noticed what was happening and hesitated. She considered stepping in but wasn't sure if it would escalate the situation. Meanwhile, the cafe owner was busy handling an order and didn't see the unfolding tension. The elderly woman quietly gathered her things, placing her tea down gently as if trying not to draw any more attention to herself. But before she could leave, the man with slicked-back hair spoke again. "Leaving already?" he asked, smirking. "We didn't mean to scare you off, ma'am. Don't worry, there are plenty of places more suited for people like you." His friends burst into laughter, and the elderly woman froze for a moment. She slowly stood, her shoulders hunched as she tried to hold back tears. The cafe, which had been filled with warmth and comfort just moments ago, now felt suffocating. But before she could take a step toward the door, the bell above the entrance jingled, signaling a new arrival. The laughter stopped. Heads turned. And that's when they saw him. Keanu Reeves stepped into the cafe, wearing a black leather jacket, a beanie, and sunglasses that he pulled off as he scanned the room. His casual, laid-back demeanor didn't scream Hollywood star, but his presence commanded attention nonetheless. For a moment, the cafe seemed to hold its breath, as if time itself had paused. The trio of professionals exchanged glances, their faces shifting from amusement to confusion. They didn't know why he was here or what he was about to do, but they could feel the shift in the air. Keanu's eyes locked on the elderly woman, who stood frozen by the door, her teacup trembling in her hands. His expression softened, and without saying a word, he crossed the room to stand by her side. "Mom?" Keanu said gently, placing a protective arm around her. "Are you okay?" The cafe fell silent. The trio stared in shock, their smug grins fading as the weight of their mistake settled in. The man with slicked-back hair opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His confidence, which had seemed so unshakable just moments ago, crumbled in the face of reality. Keanu turned to the group, his gaze calm but piercing. The kind of gaze that doesn't need words to convey its message. "What happened?" he asked his mother softly, ignoring the stares around them. She shook her head, blinking back tears. "It's nothing, darling. Let's go." But Keanu wasn't done. As he helped her gather her things, he glanced back at the trio, who now sat stiffly in their seats, unsure of how to recover from their blunder. They knew they had made a mistake, but they didn't know just how big of one it was. As Keanu guided his mother toward the exit, the barista behind the counter watched with admiration. She had recognized him immediately but hadn't expected this turn of events. There was something poetic about the way the tables had turned. Just as they reached the door, Keanu paused. He turned slightly, his gaze meeting the man with slicked-back hair, who was now staring down at his untouched cappuccino. "Be careful how you treat people," Keanu said, his voice calm but firm. "You never know who they are or what they've been through." With that, He held the door open for his mother, and they stepped into the crisp morning air. But the story wasn't over. What Keanu had planned next would make sure these rude customers never forgot this moment. As Keanu and his mother walked down the bustling street, the morning sun warmed the pavement, but it did little to ease the heaviness in her chest. She clung to Keanu's arm, her steps slow and measured, as if each one was weighed down by the humiliation she had just experienced. "Mom, you don't have to tell me everything right now," Keanu said softly. "But I know that wasn't nothing." She let out a sigh and stopped in front of a small park bench tucked under a tree. "Let's sit for a moment, darling." They sat in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds coming from the rustling leaves and the occasional chirping of birds. His mother clasped her hands in her lap, staring down at them as if the answers she sought were hidden in her fingers. "I don't want to make a scene," she finally said. "I've dealt with people like that before. Most of the time, it's easy to ignore them. But today..." Her voice trembled slightly. "I don't know. Maybe I was just having a bad morning." Keanu placed a comforting hand over hers. "You didn't deserve that. No one does." She smiled faintly, though her eyes remained downcast. "I'm proud of you, Keanu. You've always known how to rise above things like this. But I'm just an old woman. People don't think twice before judging me." Keanu's jaw tightened. He wasn't the type to get angry easily, but seeing his mother like this stirred something protective within him. "They made a mistake," he said. "And I think they know it now." "I don't need an apology," she said quickly. "I just want to forget about it." But Keanu wasn't ready to let it go. He had learned a long time ago that some lessons needed to be taught, not for revenge, but to make sure people thought twice before hurting someone else. He didn't plan to confront them aggressively, he had a different idea. One that would leave them reflecting on their actions long after today. "Mom," he said, standing up and offering her his hand, "how about we go back for some real breakfast? My treat." Her eyes widened. "Back to that café?" He nodded. "But this time, you're not going in alone." She hesitated for a moment before taking his hand. "As long as it doesn't get messy." "Trust me," Keanu said with a reassuring smile. "It won't." Back at Mason's cafe, the mood had shifted. The trio of rude customers still sat at their corner table, but their laughter had died down. The man with the slicked-back hair, who had been so full of bravado earlier, now seemed distracted, his gaze occasionally darting toward the entrance as if expecting something, or someone. His friends were unusually quiet, sipping their drinks and avoiding eye contact with the other patrons. The air was thick with tension, and even the barista behind the counter could sense it. She had seen Keanu leave with his mother earlier, but she had a feeling the story wasn't over. And she was right. The bell above the door jingled, and every head in the cafe turned as Keanu and his mother walked back in. This time, Keanu wasn't just a quiet presence in the background. He commanded the room without saying a word. His mother stood beside him, her posture straighter than before, as if his presence had given her strength. The trio exchanged nervous glances. The man with the slicked-back hair shifted in his seat, his confidence visibly shaken. Keanu led his mother to a table near the center of the cafe, where they sat down and calmly ordered breakfast. The barista, clearly rooting for them, served their food quickly and with a warm smile. "Let me know if you need anything," she whispered to Keanu before walking away. As they ate, the trio continued to fidget. One of the women whispered something to the man with the slicked-back hair, but he shook his head, his gaze fixed on his plate. It was clear they were debating whether to approach Keanu or pretend nothing had happened. Keanu, meanwhile, remained composed. He chatted with his mother, making sure she felt at ease, but he was fully aware of the eyes on him. He had no intention of making a scene, but he also knew that his presence alone was enough to make the trio squirm. Halfway through their meal, the man with the slicked-back hair couldn't take it anymore. He stood up, adjusted his tie, and walked over to Keanu's table, his hands clasped nervously in front of him. "Excuse me," he said, his voice lacking the confidence it had earlier. I just wanted to say I'm sorry." Keanu looked up, his expression unreadable. "For what?" The man swallowed hard. "For the way we treated your mother. We didn't know that she was my mother?" Keanu interrupted, raising an eyebrow. "Or that she was a human being who deserved respect regardless of who she's related to." The man's face flushed. "Both, I guess." Keanu leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. And what would you have done differently if you had known she was my mother? The man hesitated, glancing back at his friends as if searching for help. But they remained seated, their gazes fixed on their drinks. I wouldn't have said anything, he admitted quietly. Keanu nodded slowly, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make the man uncomfortable. It's not about who someone is, he said finally. It's about how you treat people when you think they're nobody. The man looked down at his shoes, his shoulders slumping. I get it. I really do. I was out of line. Keanu studied him for a moment before nodding. Apology accepted. But next time, think twice before you make someone feel small. The man nodded quickly and returned to his table, where his friends whispered furiously, no doubt discussing the lesson they had just learned. The weight of their actions hung over them like a cloud, and it was clear they wouldn't be forgetting this anytime soon. Keanu turned back to his mother, who looked at him with a mixture of pride and relief. You didn't have to do that, she said softly. I know, Keanu replied with a gentle smile. But I wanted to. They finished their meal, paid the bill, and left the cafe without looking back. But the impact of that morning lingered long after they were gone. The door to Mason's cafe closed behind Keanu and his mother, the bell jingling one last time before silence filled the room. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, like the air before a storm. The trio of rude customers remained seated, but they were no longer laughing or exchanging smug glances. Instead, they stared at their table in awkward silence, the reality of their actions finally settling in. The man with the slicked-back hair, whose confidence had dominated the cafe earlier, slouched in his seat, tracing the rim of his coffee cup with his finger. His two friends, who had encouraged the mockery, avoided eye contact with everyone, their faces flushed with embarrassment. The barista behind the counter, who had witnessed the entire scene, exchanged a glance with another worker and smiled discreetly. Justice had been served, and it hadn't required a shouting match or public humiliation, just the quiet weight of truth. But the lesson wasn't quite over. Outside, Keanu and his mother walked down the street toward a nearby park. The crisp morning air seemed fresher now, as if the encounter at the cafe had lifted a weight off both their shoulders. His mother's steps were lighter, and she no longer clung to his arm as tightly. She stopped near a bench overlooking a small pond and gestured for Keanu to sit beside her. I know you didn't do that for revenge, she said, her voice soft. You've never been the type to hold a grudge. Keanu leaned back, resting his arms on the bench. It wasn't about revenge. It was about making sure they think twice before treating someone else like that. She nodded, looking out at the ducks gliding across the water. I appreciate it. I really do. But I worry that the world won't change. People like them, people who judge others based on appearances, they'll always be around. Keanu smiled faintly. Maybe. But if even one person changes their behavior because of today, it's worth it. She tilted her head, studying him. You've always been good at seeing the bigger picture. It's something I've learned over time, Keanu replied. Life has a way of teaching you what's important. They sat in companionable silence for a moment before Keanu's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a notification, a message from an unknown number. Curious, he opened it and read. I really am sorry. I've been thinking about what you said, and you're right. I'll do better. Todd. Keanu stared at the screen for a moment, then showed the message to his mother. She read it and smiled. You see? You've already made a difference. Maybe, Keanu said, slipping the phone back into his pocket. But it's not about me. It's about the people they meet next, the people who won't have to go through what you did this morning. His mother's eyes glistened, but she quickly wiped them and gave him a playful nudge. Enough of this serious talk. What do you say we find a nice place for dessert? Something sweet to end the day on a good note. Keanu chuckled. I know just the place. Meanwhile, back at Mason's cafe, Todd and his friends remained at their table, but the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. The woman in the group tapped her fingers against her cup, breaking the silence. We really messed up, didn't we? Todd nodded slowly. Yeah, we did. What do you think he meant by think twice before making someone feel small? She asked. Todd sighed, leaning back in his seat. It's simple. It means we shouldn't need to know someone's background or status to treat them with respect. His other friend, who had been silent until now, spoke up. I feel awful. We didn't even give her a chance. We just assumed the worst because she looked different. Todd rubbed the back of his neck. We weren't just rude, we were cruel. And the fact that she turned out to be Keanu Reeves' mother shouldn't be the reason we feel bad. The woman nodded. We should have known better from the start. They sat quietly for a moment before Todd stood up, tossing a few bills on the table to cover their bill. Come on, he said. Let's get out of here. I've had enough coffee for the day. As they walked out of the café, the barista watched them leave, a knowing smile on her face. She had seen plenty of rude customers come and go, but this was the first time she had witnessed such a drastic change in attitude. It wasn't often that people reflected on their behavior so quickly. Outside, Todd and his friends walked in the direction of the office building where they worked, the city bustling around them. But the noise of traffic and the chatter of passers-by seemed distant as they processed what had just happened. Todd, still lost in thought, suddenly stopped in front of a flower shop. The others turned to him, confused. What are you doing? The woman asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked inside and returned a few moments later with a small bouquet of white lilies. What's that for? His friend asked. Todd shrugged. Just something to make up for being a jerk. I don't know if she'll still be around, but it's worth a shot. They exchanged surprised glances, but followed him as he retraced their steps back toward the café. When they reached the corner where Keanu and his mother had disappeared earlier, Todd spotted the park bench near the pond. There they are, he said, his heart pounding slightly. Todd's grip tightened around the bouquet of white lilies as he approached the park bench. His friends followed closely behind, their steps hesitant but determined. Keanu and his mother sat side by side, quietly enjoying the peaceful scenery of the pond, where ducks glided lazily across the water. The late morning sun filtered through the trees, casting a soft glow over the moment, making it feel almost surreal. Todd cleared his throat as he drew near, and Keanu turned to face him, his expression calm but unreadable. His mother glanced up as well, her gaze shifting from the bouquet to Todd's nervous posture. Mr. Reeves, Todd began, his voice slightly shaky, I know I already apologized back at the cafe, but I needed to say it again. To both of you. Keanu studied him for a moment, and then his gaze softened. You didn't have to come all this way, he said. I know, Todd admitted. But it didn't feel right leaving things like that. I treated you unfairly, ma'am, he said, addressing Keanu's mother directly. I made assumptions, and I said things I regret. I can't take them back, but I wanted to say I'm truly sorry. For a brief moment, there was silence, broken only by the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant honking of a car. Keanu's mother smiled warmly, her eyes kind and forgiving. Thank you for saying that, she said softly. It means more than you know. Todd exhaled, as if a weight had been lifted off his chest. He held out the bouquet. I brought these. I know flowers can't fix what happened, but I hope they'll be a small gesture of how much I regret it. Keanu's mother accepted the bouquet, her fingers gently brushing over the soft petals. They're lovely. Thank you. Keanu watched the interaction unfold, a quiet sense of satisfaction settling over him. He wasn't someone who sought out dramatic resolutions or grand displays of remorse, but there was something genuine about Todd's gesture that made this moment feel complete. Todd hesitated before speaking again. I don't know what made me act the way I did. Maybe it's because I've been around people who think it's okay to judge others based on appearances. But after today, I realize how wrong that is. I promise I'll do better. Keanu nodded. That's what matters, what you do moving forward. Todd smiled faintly, then turned to leave, but Keanu's mother spoke up. Wait. Todd stopped and turned back to her, unsure of what to expect. I believe in second chances, she said. And I believe you're sincere. But if you really want to do better, don't just remember this moment. Use it. Stand up for someone else when you see them being treated unfairly. Todd's expression shifted, as if her words had unlocked something deeper within him. I will, he said firmly. With that, he and his friends walked away, their steps lighter than before. This wasn't just about apologizing, it was about growth, about realizing that change was possible if they were willing to embrace it. As Todd and his friends disappeared down the street, Keanu leaned back against the bench, a content smile on his face. "You handled that well," he said to his mother. She chuckled. "I think we both did." They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments before Keanu's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from his assistant. "Everything's confirmed for the charity dinner tonight. You're set to speak at 8 p.m. He tucked the phone back into his pocket and turned to his mother. "How about we spend the rest of the afternoon exploring the city? I know a place with the best desserts in town." She smiled. "I'd like that." They stood up and began walking, their pace relaxed and unhurried. The events of the morning no longer felt heavy. They felt like part of a story that had ended exactly as it should have. Meanwhile, back at Mason's cafe, the barista stood behind the counter, recounting the events of the day to one of her coworkers. "I've worked here for 3 years, and I've never seen anything like it," she said, shaking her head in amazement. "It's not every day you see someone like Keanu Reeves walk in, much less stand up for someone like that." Her coworker smiled. "Maybe it'll be a reminder to everyone that you never know who you're dealing with." The barista nodded. "It was a good reminder for me, too. I'll never assume anything about anyone again." As she returned to her work, the bell above the cafe door jingled again, signaling the arrival of new customers. Life in the city continued as it always did, but the impact of Keanu's presence lingered like the faint aroma of fresh coffee, subtle yet lasting. That evening, Keanu arrived at the charity dinner, his mother by his side. The room was filled with influential figures, celebrities and philanthropists, all gathered to raise money for underprivileged communities. Keanu took the stage at 8 p.m. as planned, and delivered a heartfelt speech about kindness, empathy, and the importance of treating everyone with dignity. As he spoke, his mind briefly drifted back to the events of the morning. He realized that the lesson Todd had learned wasn't just for him, it was for anyone willing to listen. "Change starts with small actions," Keanu said to the audience. "It's in the way we treat the people we meet every day. Respect doesn't cost anything, but its impact can be priceless." The room erupted in applause, but Keanu's focus remained on the meaning behind the words. He knew that somewhere out there, Todd and his friends were reflecting on the day's events, and maybe, just maybe, they would carry that lesson forward. As he stepped off the stage, his mother hugged him tightly. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. Keanu smiled, knowing that today wasn't just another day. It was a reminder of the power of small moments, of unexpected encounters, and of the quiet strength of those who choose to lead by example.